language, I chose the Romanian language. So some facts about the Romanian language is that it's really similar to Romance languages and Latin languages. So with lexical similarity, it's really close with Italian with 77% similarity, and then 71% with Spanish, which was the least percentage similarity that I found, but it's still a really high amount. So it's with word order, it's the same as English. It has the subject, verb, object word order. Romanian does have gendered nouns, and then they do have inflected verbs for person, but the verbs can also depend on the mood and the tense that they're trying to portray. And then Romanian does have 22 consonants and 7 vowels. And so this is just a picture of the Romanian alphabet. So the Romanian alphabet is the Latin alphabet, but it has 5 additional letters that have diacritics, as you can see here on the A, the 2 A's, the I, the S, and the T. So typically the Latin alphabet follows the rule that each letter corresponds to one sound. However, there are exceptions. Multiple letters can correspond to one sound, and then vice versa, multiple sounds can correspond to one letter. And this is just due to like rules or exceptions. Like in English, how sometimes if 2 sounds are together, it's going to make this sound, or if something's voiced and something isn't voiced, it can change the sound also. And then so distinctions of the Romanian language. So plurals, as I mentioned, that they do have gendered nouns. And so before they make a plural, they have to differentiate whether it's a masculine noun, a feminine noun, or a neuter noun. And in English, we typically just add the S because we don't have to differentiate the nouns. But within Romanian, you do. And so, for example, if you have a consonant that, if a noun ends in a consonant, you would just add the E sound at the end and it would become plural. And then if it was a feminine noun and it ended with a, you would add ale, or it would be replaced with ale, and then it would become a noun. So as I mentioned, there are 22 consonants and 7 vowels and 3 diphthongs. So what I found in the vowels, that there are 2 vowels in English that do not, or sorry, 2 vowels in Romanian that do not correspond with English. They don't have an equivalent. And then the remaining vowels, they're considered medium length, and they're considered medium length when compared to English because they're short. Their vowels are not as short as our short vowels, but they're not as long as our long vowels. So they're considered medium length vowels. And then Romanian also has unique letters that do not exist in English. And these listed are only some of the variations. There are other variations, but I just wanted to mention these. So for my broad category, I chose language disorders. So this is just a quick description of what language disorders are. So ASHA describes language disorders as deficits in receptive and or expressive language, or written language, or any type of symbol communication. So I did want to mention that, as we've learned, like variation due to ethnicity or the regional grounds or social or any type of variation is not considered a disorder of speech or language. And then specifically for bilingual children, it's not a disorder unless it is present in both languages. So then for my specific population, I chose ADHD. So ADHD interferes or can interfere with development and or functioning. So some characteristics would be inattention. So like the individual is having a lot of trouble staying on a certain task for a period of time, or they're hyperactive, so they're constantly moving, or they're really fidgety, even in inappropriate situations, maybe in like the classroom where they're supposed to be sitting still. They could just be really fidgety and wanting to move around or moving around. And there's also impulsivity. So they act without thinking. They kind of have a lot of difficulty with the self-control. I thought a really big thing, especially for treatment, is the desire for immediate rewards. As soon as like they get something, like they want the reward, they don't really respond well to like a delayed reward. So ADHD and language disorders in Romanian children. I personally had a lot of trouble finding research with this. It's very, very limited, and research that is available is not within the general public. From what I found, it's mainly with institutionalized and orphaned Romanian children. And so what I did find an article that stated that there's no published record of the number of ADHD cases in the public, but an analyst did conclude that the incidence was about 2%, and he concluded this because he got data from the Romanian Center for Mental Health and Fight Against Drugs. And so with that data, he was able to conclude that in the general public, it was about 2%. But I could not find anything on language disorders within the Romanian children. Obviously, they are present. It's just not something that in research that I was able to find considering this. So a lot of what I'm going to say for like the implications in therapy and like my evidence-based practice and my therapy is just going on what I have read about it and my personal experiences and my clinical judgment. So implications in therapy, there are differences in grammar that can make it difficult for Romanian children to grasp the concept of English, specifically like with plurals, like how English doesn't have feminine or masculine, how we would just add the S, it could be a difficult concept. And then for ADHD and language, personally for me, in therapy, it would just require frequent redirections to the tasks that we were working on. And especially, and then so for EBP, I wasn't able to find research, like I said, on the Romanian children with ADHD and language disorders. So I went with what we learned in class, the cross-linguistic approach and the bilingual approach. I think these two in conjunction would be appropriate just because the cross-linguistic targets features that are different, and as I mentioned, plurals are different, but bilingual approach targets similarities, which is the word order. Those two are similar, and I did want to mention ASHA states this technique, the bilingual approach, could be more beneficial to start with for bilingual children. So for my treatment activity, I obviously chose a language activity. I chose common objects because I think that they're really simple. You could start with someone who has severe deficits or even someone who's a little bit more mild. You can't really, I personally feel like you can't go wrong because if they're more severe, and you're trying to get them to express what they're saying, you can use either common, you can use the objects themselves or even pictures, really just depending on the client that you have. So you can have a child say what they are, and if they're a little bit more advanced, you can have the child give the description of what they are, and this will just really just focus on like the sentence structure and everything. You can target a lot with that. And if you're trying to do receptive, you can have a child point to what object you name, or you could give the description of an object, and then you can have them point to it in like maybe a field of 2 or 3. And then I put plurals, which would be the cross-linguistic. And so you could use pictures or objects, or you could use like a Lego activity. You could be playing with blocks, and then like give me one, and then or give me Legos. Just working with the plurals. And then so if you do use like objects or pictures, you could be like you could have a picture of like a single, like maybe like a horse, and like, oh, this is one, and then like they would respond like horse, and then you could have one with multiple horses, and they were like, oh, like these are, and then they would respond horses. And then it would be the same thing with receptive, like you would have the two pictures, oh, like show me the horse, and then show me the horses. I think that activity could be beneficial for their language. And then these are my references.